Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 54 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another episode. Before we jump into today's case, just a few quick reminders. The bonus content will be rolling out sometime this fall, which will entail different genres of true crime like natural disasters, plane crashes, and one type is going to be like a listener file. If you have a true crime story that you would like to share on the podcast, and remember, you can stay anonymous, just email it to thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com. So examples of this could be like hometown murders, almost being abducted, your uncle, who you later found out was a mobster, anything of the sort. Also, take a second to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to get new episodes on Mondays, and it is the best way to support the podcast. One quick note is, bear with me, for a few weeks I am trying a few new audio techniques because it's driving me crazy how tinny and far away I sound on the hosting platforms when my audio doesn't sound that way when I edit it. I am learning that the hosting platforms mess with your audio before they put it out, and I'm trying to get the best sound to you guys, and of course, since I am 4 weeks ahead on creating all of my episodes, when I try to make something sound better, I have to wait like a month to see if it works on the hosting platform. So try out different platforms if you need to. Lastly, check out the website at thekillfile.com to either submit a case that you want me to cover, which I always love because I'm always looking for new cases and things that I haven't heard of, and I am grateful for you guys doing that. Or just to check out the merch site for some fun true crime merch. It's a great way to show support to the podcast and to also spread the word. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today, we are going to talk about a man named Arthur Shawcross, aka the Genesee River Killer. Trigger warnings for today are going to be murder, murder of a minor, rape, rape of a minor, pedophilia, cannibalism, brutality, mutilation, talks of sodomy, animal cruelty, and domestic abuse. Yeah, here we go. Arthur Shawcross was born on June 6, 1945 in Kittery, Maine to Mother Betty and his father Arthur Sr. It was said that young Arthur would go by the name of Art. Arthur Sr. was said to be a corporal, which to those not from the military is a non-commissioned officer in the Army. So, real quick, a non-commissioned officer is someone who serves in the military until they gain the rank before they officially gain their role with the ability to command personnel that are under them. A commissioned officer is someone who would gain their position kind of like outside of the military before they become an officer. They not only outrank all non-commissioned officers, but there are some requirements before becoming a commissioned officer, one being that a commissioned officer has to have a college degree, and there's also some other perks that come along with being an officer when you join. So you can either join the military as an enlisted person, meaning that you don't have a degree and you kind of work from the bottom up, as well as have like a specific job or abilities with their training in the military that they always provide. And this is someone who can work their way up to a non-commissioned officer. If you are not an enlisted member and you join and you already have a college degree, you can join the military and go to officers training. And then as an officer, you would serve kind of overseeing the enlisted members, giving orders and inciting different tasks. They're kind of like leadership or whatever in the military, and they also have ranks of their own. That was just a quick note for anybody who doesn't understand that. It's always fun to learn things. Moving on. Not long after Shawcross was born, his mother Betty and him would actually move to Watertown, New York. Shawcross would later admit that not only was he a chronic bedwetter, but that he had been sexually abused as well. Shawcross would claim and allege that he was sexually abused by his aunt, his mother, and his sister as well. Although some sources would say that he had admitted to having an actual sexual relationship in junior high with his sister, so I'm not sure if that's what he meant by his sister abusing him or if that was all separate. All three of these women have denied these accusations, and one source would say that Shawcross actually got his aunt's name wrong while he was accusing her. Not exactly sure what that means, but I will say that we know now that bedwetting, among other causes, can be linked to stress, trauma, and also sexual abuse. So this could be a sign that something was going on for him when he was younger. The types of abuse that Shawcross would later allege against his mother was that, quote, she would insert various objects into his rectum, end quote. He would also allege that at the age of 9 years old, his mother had introduced him to and allegedly performed oral sex on young Shawcross. Shawcross had a nickname of quote-unquote Oddie at school because he was a loner who stood apart from the other students, which is probably a play on words from the nickname of Art. He was said to have gotten good grades at first in school, and then they went downhill pretty quickly after the first few years. At some point, his IQ was tested, and it would show that his IQ was about 86. According to the Big Book of Serial Killers, which I love, by the way, an 86 IQ would mean that Shawcross was borderline mentally disabled. However, as he got older, it was said that he was tested again, and this time his score would turn out to be 105. How do people get their IQs tested? I need to know. I see the things online, but I always think that they're probably crap or a scam or whatever, but I want to know what my IQ is, so if you have done this and you know how to go about it, I would love to hear from you. Shawcross would have another telltale sign that he may not be the most upstanding citizen as he got older, which was showing cruelty to animals when he was younger. Criminalist Dr. Elizabeth Yardley, which we have heard from many times before, I just love her. I love to listen to her. I love the things that she says. She is fantastic. She says that Shawcross was someone who enjoyed others' suffering when she spoke about him on an episode of World's Most Evil Killers about the Genesee River Killer. Shawcross was said to have a difficult time as a teenager following his questionable childhood. He was rebellious and violent and was a bully in school who would lash out at his peers, which made him sort of a loner. Instead of graduating high school like most people his age, Shawcross had dropped out in 1960, and then he would be arrested for things like burglary and some arsons as well as other crimes. When Shawcross was just 19 years old, he would marry what sources would say to be his first wife, a woman named Sarah. Dr. Elizabeth Yardley would say when she analyzes these relationships when it comes to Arthur Shawcross that she immediately knew clearly that to Shawcross, women served a purpose for him instead of being seen as a partner. He was misogynistic in nature and didn't see his wife or other women as people. Sarah and Shawcross would welcome a son into their lives in 1965, but around the same time, he would be caught for a second-degree burglary and would be sentenced to 6 months of probation, which was surprising to me that someone with a criminal history of this crime would get off so easily. So while I was scripting this part, I went to insert the word theft instead of burglary because burglary is hard to say for me sometimes. And then I questioned myself if those were the same thing and what the difference was. So real quick, if you're curious like me, because I found this fascinating, burglary is when someone enters a building or whatever as a trespasser of the property and steals or tries to steal, and then either does unlawful damage or inflicts serious bodily harm to another. Robbery is when a person steals while doing so and they use force, for example, like a street mugging or if you rob a shop. Theft is when someone steals another's property with the intention of keeping it for good. There are different sentences for each one of these, and there's kind of subtypes for robbery and burglary, and the max for those are both life, depending on, of course, the subtype. The max sentence for theft is 7 years. So it's an interesting tidbit and something to keep in mind if you're ever thinking of stealing something. Don't do it. During that time that Shawcross was sentenced to the 6 months probation, he doesn't have one full-time job. He does more odds and end kind of jobs more than anything else. A few of those would include an apprentice butcher, working as a laborer, and my personal favorite, he was a grave digger. What's that like? Sarah and Shawcross would separate in their marriage after being married for about 2 years, which doesn't really surprise me at all if he's a misogynistic asshole. Apparently, not only was Shawcross unfaithful pretty regularly, but since he couldn't hold down a job and wasn't exactly someone that you could rely on, that would be the reason that Sarah would ask for a divorce. When Shawcross was 22 years old on April 7th, 1967, Arthur Shawcross would then be drafted into the military as the Vietnam War was raging. When he was drafted into the Army, he would then give up his parental rights to his 18-month-old son and divorced Sarah. He would never see his son again, which probably was the absolute best thing for both of them. After only 5 months, Shawcross would actually marry again, this time to a woman named Linda. The whole first year of him and Linda's marriage, Shawcross was serving in Vietnam. I wonder how they met. Anyways, later on, Shawcross would allege that he had over 30 kills in Vietnam, that he helped to massacre a village, and that he was allegedly contaminated with Agent Orange. He would also go on to tell people that he had killed a sex worker and then cannibalized her as well. Well, come to find out, many of the things that he was running around telling people about his time in Vietnam was from a movie and some books about Vietnam. Shawcross was so full of shit that they figured out that he actually never even saw any combat and was a supply clerk for soldiers who needed supplies and hung back in the supply room. Which is like, why do you have to lie about that, man? Like, all jobs in the military are essential and important. Why in the world would you want to lie and say that you killed so many people and cannibalized some? That's just not a good flex, man. Like, what the fuck? You know how you know someone's full of shit? They brag. Most military people who have had to take lives or kill others, they don't usually go around bragging about it, and many won't even talk about it, except with like a very few. What a douche. According to a book written by Jack Olson about Arthur Shawcross's story, the book's called The Misbegotten Son, Shawcross was seeing military psychiatrists and telling him the stories he had, I guess, made up about combat and was still acting and seemingly weird to his wife and the doctors. When Linda would ask why he was upset or anything, he would come back from his appointments with the psychiatrists, and Shawcross did not want to talk about it. There had been 4 visits, and on the 4th, the doctor came out to Linda and said Shawcross had bolted out of the back door and was not cooperating with the psychiatrists, and then handed Linda some papers for having him committed. I'm guessing for psychiatric care. Linda was headed out the door of the office when the psychiatrist said, and this is a quote from the book, quote, "Keep him away from fires, Miss Shawcross. I don't want to discourage you, but this is the way he gets his sexual enjoyment." End quote. This was after Shawcross had been having some issues with erectile dysfunction with his wife. Can you imagine being told that by a doctor about your partner? Yikes. I'm not here to kink shame, but yikes. Linda would later report that the couple had a puppy that had given Shawcross a little bit of a bite, and Shawcross lost his shit so badly that he threw the dog against the wall and then snapped its neck. Ugh. Linda would say that immediately Shawcross would start crying, saying that he didn't mean to do that, and then wrapped the pup in a blanket. At the time, his mother Betty didn't think that Shawcross needed a mental health hospital, but his father actually thought it could be good for him. Sounds like Shawcross had some serious mental health problems and anger issues, and if he had been committed, maybe he would have became someone else? Who knows? Following closely after this was a suicide attempt by Shawcross by overdosing on pills that the doctor had given him. In fact, Linda found him in the bathroom in full uniform, and it said that he had like all of his badges and merits on as well. And next to him was a baggie of white powder and 2 empty pill bottles. The hospital would later tell Linda that had she not found him when she did, where they could pump out his stomach so quickly, he would have died. Shawcross would be honorably discharged in 1969 after 2 years of military service. At this time, Shawcross was working at a paper mill factory, and this was back in Watertown. One night, Linda went next door to her parents to visit her brother that I guess she hadn't seen in like 11 years. And when she came back to serve Shawcross his dinner that was wrapped in the oven, he was mean and jealous that Linda had spent time with her family. That night, Linda said that she realized Shawcross was drunk and she knew this was going to be a fight. Sadly, Linda was 4 months pregnant when she said something that set Shawcross off, and as Linda tried to cover her stomach from what she knew was about to happen, he beat Linda until she was unconscious. When she finally aroused, Shawcross was not there, and Linda was able to make it next door to her parents, who took her to the hospital. Linda said, sadly, she had a miscarriage of a little boy, which is horrifying and fucking sickening, and a miscarriage, from my own experience, is something that sticks with you, and I can't even imagine being that far along, and it wasn't even a natural miscarriage. It was forced on her from a disgusting pig who didn't like when she said the slightest thing back to him. Linda also was said to have had black eyes, she was bloody, and then her face was swollen, but thankfully nothing was broken. After this, Linda's brother beat the shit out of Shawcross and threatened to kill him if he ever laid hands on his sister again. Good for him. When Linda's father went to talk to Shawcross, he was said to have found him with slit wrists on the floor, and he called an ambulance. This is when Linda knew she was done. Shawcross would then move in with a friend and went on a crime spree of burglary. During this time, Shawcross would marry his 3rd wife, Penny Sherbino. On May 7th, 1972, a young boy whose name was Jack Blake would go missing. Jack was a 10-year-old little boy who had met Shawcross while fishing. Shawcross denied any involvement in Jack's disappearance, even though Jack's family had known that Shawcross had taken Jack and his little brother Pete fishing before without permission, and this is all in the book, and was seen fishing around that area often. The authorities didn't have any evidence of Shawcross's connection, nor did they find any body. So although the police kept their eye on Shawcross, they couldn't really connect him to Jack's disappearance. The next part is brutal, so just a fair warning. Later on, Shawcross would admit to not only strangling the young boy, but also said that he cut off his penis and testicles and ate them along with his heart. This is the kind of man we are dealing with. Sadly, only a few months later, in September, still 1972, another child would go missing. Thankfully, these are the only 2 children that Shawcross killed. Not that the other victims are any less important, but at least we don't have another wholehearted child killer like some others. This time, an 8-year-old little girl named Karen Ann Hill would vanish while she was playing outside. This is a parent's absolute worst fucking nightmare. No one knew what happened to poor Karen. Thank God for cameras and video footage nowadays. Karen was in her own front yard, and no one knew anything. The very next day, the authorities would find Karen's body. She had sadly been raped, strangled, and the killer shoved mud and debris into her mouth. These are the only 2 known child victims. Dr. Elizabeth Yardley comments on when killers shove things into their victim's mouth like that, it is for the humiliation, which of course we know fits right along with sadism, and she believes that Shawcross is trying to demean and humiliate little Karen with her murder. Shawcross at the time was 26 years old, and police did bring him in for questioning when it came to Karen's murder. This, of course, was due to Shawcross being linked to Jack in knowing that little boy, and there was a witness who came forward identifying Karen close to a bicycle that matched Shawcross's. Now, Shawcross makes a move that surprises most by telling the authorities that he would admit to killing Karen Ann and says he will take them to the remains of Jack Blake, which are sadly already skeletonized. This was a move to lessen the charges placed on him, and the police knew that without any physical evidence, they may not get a conviction of murder on Shawcross. On October 17, 1972, Shawcross would plead guilty to manslaughter for Karen Ann Hill's case, and then Shawcross wasn't even convicted for Jack Blake's case, which blew my mind. I don't understand how this can happen. His maximum sentence for manslaughter was 25 years, and his sentence was indeterminate. Shawcross played the system well and subsequently was released on April 30th, 1987, after having served 14 and a half years in prison for killing 2 children. Here is an example of how prison, without therapy or without help for mental health issues or whatever, does not always reform people for the crimes that they have committed. While Shawcross was in prison, he became pen pals with a woman named Rose Wally. When it comes to parole, apparently you need to be, quote-unquote, not only a model prisoner, and then you need to have someone, I guess, on the outside who's willing to help you get, back on your feet, essentially. They need to find you a job and housing as some part of the parole, which I didn't know that. Penny had divorced Shawcross after he had confessed to killing the 2 children, and Rose would end up becoming Shawcross's 4th wife. No judgment for the number of wives from me, but I am definitely judging Rose for marrying a man who had admitted to killing 2 children. You couldn't do any better than your prison pen pal? Come on now, what happened to Rose where Arthur Shawcross was her best option? Shawcross is now 41 years old, and when he gets out of prison, he decides to move to Binghamton, which is a part of upstate New York. Sorry if I didn't say that right. Once this community figured out that a child killer had moved into their area, they basically chased his ass out of there, and this happened again at the next place he moved. Shawcross then relocated to a larger city, more north, called Rochester, New York. This is when he would work as a food prep worker at night for a company called G&G Cheese. Not only does Shawcross have a mistress named Clara, but he also looks for sex workers when he can. Clara was said to be 56 years old and worked at a nursing home, and this is where Shawcross would often go see her. Clara was a mother of 10 children. The relationship between Clara and Shawcross is said to be a turbulent one, but one that's more steady than any other relationship he's had. So Shawcross was said to have needed to switch his victim profile if he wanted to continue to kill people, because Although children were easy, they brought on too much heat. March 24th, 1988, a woman named Dorothy Blackburn's body would turn up in a local creek in a park called Northampton Park. Her body would be found near a culvert, which I had to look up what that was. And it's those big pipes or like tunnels that allow water to go under a road, making like that little bridge. And they're sometimes big and they're sometimes made out of concrete. Raise your hand if you didn't know that that's what these were called. So Dorothy had not been seen in nearly 9 days, and her sister had already reported her missing. Dorothy's autopsy showed that her cause of death was strangulation and that her killer had bitten her genitals. The murder of Dorothy Blackburn wouldn't be solved for over a year. September 11th, 1988, the body of Anna Steffen was found as skeletal remains and was buried in debris. Anna was 27 years old with 2 children and was a pregnant sex worker with no family who looked out for her. She had been dumped in the Genesee Gorge after being strangled to death. After not being able to identify the woman's remains, the authorities were able to have a reconstruction done of her skull, and after publishing this picture, it was sadly her father that would call in to identify Anna. There was no physical evidence left behind, which made these types of murders hard to solve. The 5th victim of Shawcross would be a woman named Dorothy Keeler. She was 59 years old, who was last seen on July 29th, 1989, while her remains were found in later October of the same year. According to Shawcross, Dorothy was a waitress who he had met and began an affair with. One day while Shawcross was headed to fish, he ran into Dorothy, where she would go with him to the fishing area. Shawcross would then say that the couple had sex, and while it was raining, they were huddled up under something. They began to argue. Dorothy apparently had threatened to tell his various affairs. Remember, he's still married to Rose. And this is when Shawcross lost his temper and claimed to pick up a smaller log and beat Dorothy in the side of the head where she died quickly. He had claimed to have buried her body under a tree that was knocked over, and then he left. Later, Shawcross would confess that he had gone back to Dorothy's body and then proceeded to remove her skull and throw it in the Genesee River. One source says to this day her skull has not been found. Patricia Ives, nicknamed Patty, who was a 25-year-old sex worker who had met Shawcross at the same diner where Dorothy had worked, was allegedly offering Shawcross her services for $25, where the pair would then head to a construction site nearby. Shawcross would later allege that while the pair were having sex, he would see that Patty was trying to take his wallet, and this is where he would push her against the ground extremely hard, and claimed to have sodomized her in the form of rape, and then proceeded to strangle her to death. Shawcross then said he buried her under some construction material scraps and then hid in the construction site until it was dark when he would head home. Later, it would be seen that the bodies of Dorothy Keeler, Patty Ives, and Anna Steffen were all fairly close together along the Genesee River. In the areas around the river, there was a lot of brush and debris, and that would make it easier to conceal a body. The authorities realized that after finding 4 bodies of mostly sex workers within a year and a half, that it was up to them to put out a warning to women in the sex work field to be cautious. Something that I loved about this documentary was that the investigators on the case recognized that sex workers are just people. And Lynd Johnson, who was the head of the case, would say that while some people wouldn't care about these women who were sex workers, that they were just people with families. And it's rare that you hear that from the authorities, especially back then. Johnson would also comment on the fact that they had set up what he called a war room where they hung the pictures of the victims to remember the different women to continue remembering who these victims were. This is around the time that investigators would speak to different sex workers who were on a street called Lyle Avenue. This is when the authorities would hear from a woman that a man named Mitch, who worked at G&G Cheese, was often seen talking to sex workers in their area. It was said that the authorities followed up this tip, but unfortunately they had talked to the day workers or management or whoever, and I guess like day and night workers weren't really connected to each other that much. And remember, Arthur Shawcross was a night worker. In October of 1989, a 30-year-old woman named June Stott had gone missing, and shortly after, her body was found in November of the same year. June was said to have been mildly mentally disabled, but was a friend of Rose and Shawcross's. On one particular day, Shawcross allegedly claimed to have seen June near the river where he approached her and asked if she wanted to go for a ride. He then claimed to have taken her to the beach where they hung out on the sand and then fed some birds nearby. Shawcross then claimed that the pair walked towards an area that was deserted and had sex. He then allegedly said something about June not being a virgin when June started screaming. Shawcross then put his hand over her mouth to keep her quiet and then supposedly realized he had suffocated her. When June's body was found, it was said to be a horrific scene of brutality. Shawcross had used something called a deer hunter's cut on June, which means he actually cut her from her sternum to her pelvic area. Shawcross would later say that he cut her this way to help her decompose faster. Later on, he would actually claim that when he cut her open, he, quote, removed her vagina and some of her organs and ate them, end quote. For the record, I don't believe Shawcross's account of how things happened at all. I think there may be some truth to it, but like for this victim in particular, and this is just my opinion, but the story doesn't make sense. What would make sense is if Shawcross was raping June, who, remember, was friends with Shawcross and his wife Rose, and hung out with them often. Maybe she wouldn't want to have betrayed her friend in that way, so maybe Shawcross was raping June, which is why she was screaming, and why he had to put his hand over her mouth, and then he didn't accidentally suffocate her, but he did it on purpose to shut her up and keep her from telling anyone. That makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Again, just my conjecture, but his stories don't add up completely. During the investigation, an FBI profiler would be brought onto the case to see if they knew anything further than the now combined Rochester and New York State Police forces. FBI came up with the initial profile that this man was middle-aged, somewhere in his 30s. Is that middle-aged? Fuck. They thought he was a paper worker on an assembly line, or what they thought to be a menial worker of some sort, meaning like not a lot of skill is needed for the job. They believed that he was someone who drove around a lot and would frequent the area of the river because he would like to fish. They also believed that although this man was able to have a relationship with a woman, that it would be most likely not stable, which is completely true with the multiple affairs that Shawcross has had on his wife Rose. The profile would also suggest that this man had issues with sexual functionality, which was also true, and they believed that he would be someone who returned to the scene of his crimes, which I have always found so fascinating because, first off, you're returning to the place where you have essentially done like one of the worst things a human being can do to another human being. But there's also this thought to me, like, I wonder if they do that not only to relive the horrible thing they did, because we know that time and time again they get pleasure of reliving what they did and the memory of what had happened or whatever. But I also wonder if they have to like reconvince themselves that this is real and that it really happened. Have you guys ever done that? I mean, obviously not in a murderous way, or at least I hope not. And if you have, you look really good today. Please don't kill me. But I mean something like so shocking and disturbingly weird in your own life that you have to sort of keep reminding yourself that it's real. Like, for any of my mom listeners out there, I did this a lot when I was pregnant in the beginning of, like, both my pregnancies. I would wake up in the morning and it was just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm pregnant. Like, you forgot briefly and your brain tells you that it's real again and again until, like, you're further along and it's kind of accepted. But I feel like I've done this in other times of my life where I have to, like, remember or tell myself that this is real and it really happened, especially if it's, like, crazy or whatever. Maybe it's, like, a trauma response. And this is probably not why serial killers do this, but it's all that I can do to relate because I feel like I kind of get it if that's why by any reach of the imagination, which it's probably not. It soon became apparent to the authorities that the serial killer was not only escalating in violence, but in his victim count as well. A woman named Marie Welch went missing on November 5th, 1989. Shawcross would allegedly later claim to have picked up Marie to take her to a small beach near the Genesee River. And this is where they would begin to have an argument over the price of Marie's sex work services. Here's where Shawcross would again claim that this woman tried to steal his wallet and then he strangled her. This time, though, Shawcross would change his story to the authorities and say instead of the wallet thing that he actually realized she was on her period and that's why he killed her. According to the book by Jack Olson, Shawcross claimed that he asked her if she was on her period and that she had said no. But when he went to feel her, he felt a tampon and blood. This is when he said he asked her for his money back, and she allegedly told him to go fuck himself. Shawcross then said he strangled her until she passed out. He used the word choke, but choking and strangling are different things. And when someone puts hands on you, it's strangling, because choking is from food. He then said he found some rope in his car, and he tied her hands and her feet, and then claimed to have shoved a towel in her vagina. When Marie woke up from being passed out, she asked what he had done to her. Shawcross then said he pulled out the towel. It was pretty clean, so this is when, quote, I mounted her, my sweat dripping into her face. That was when she said, I love you. I kissed her and then killed her, end quote. If any of you are interested in reading the book, The Begotten Son by Jack Olson, it seems like a really good book, and it goes into much further detail of what Arthur Shawcross did and said and all of the different situations. He then claimed to have taken her body down to the road near the river and dumped her in some nearby bushes. Marie was just 22 years old. Okay, so now we are at 8 victims, if you include the 2 children from the beginning. Our timeline is now just after November 5th, 1989, and for the last 6 victims, I want you guys to keep in mind that they will all happen within a 2-month period. Yeah, he's escalating fast and seems to be in some sort of like a killing frenzy, which is terrifying. The next victim would be found on November 11th, and her name was Frances Brown, a woman who was also 22 years old. Shawcross would say that he killed this victim by choking her with his penis during some oral play, and then said that he kept having sex with Frances even though she was dead. There is a much more descriptive tale of how this happened in the book. He then took her body to a nearby embankment. I was curious here if they knew this serial killer was out there operating around the river. How come they didn't just post up a bunch of officers along the riverbanks to keep watch or like hide out? I mean, I guess the river does kind of look windy, but still. Before I talk about the next victim, I just have to throw something out there. So I get really uncomfortable when I have to say whether a victim is black or white or brown or whatever, because it shouldn't matter what their skin color is, right? A victim is a victim, and who cares what ethnicity they are? But in that, I understand some cases are so important to share their skin color because, as history shows, black people, brown people, indigenous people, etc., are not covered in the media as much as white victims are, hands down. We have already talked about how sex workers and drug addicts are sometimes seen as less than and aren't cared about as much either, which is fucking sickening. So, when someone is reported as black or Latina or Asian or whatever, I will continue to say how they are described so that we can look at the different cases and usually see that race plays a huge role in true crime and what is investigated and what is not. But just know that I hate pointing out someone's skin color because all people are people and it shouldn't matter what someone's race is when they're a victim. However, I understand why it's reported, so we as privileged white people can see how different black and brown victims might be treated, especially back then. But this is still ringing true today. I will say usually, because it's not always the case, but historically that is absolutely true and it's shameful. Okay, moving on, I just had to throw that out. On November 15th, a body of a 30-year-old black woman named Kimberly Logan, who had been a sex worker off the Lyle Avenue area, was found dead in someone's yard. Sadly, it was seen that Kimberly had been kicked in the stomach and beaten. During her autopsy, it would be found that she had some leaves that were stuffed inside her throat. The next victim would be found by a hunter on November 27th in a swampy area in a county nearby named Elizabeth Gibson. Sadly, she had been strangled to death. It was stated that she had gotten into Shawcross's vehicle to stay warm, and this was during a time where Shawcross was getting coffee from inside a local diner. In the car, it was alleged that the pair engaged in oral sex, and of course, again, Shawcross claimed that this woman tried to take his wallet, he lost his temper, and strangled her. I love how this fucker uses the excuse of all of these women just happen to be thieves, and he says this as if, even if that were true, that it's somehow okay that he killed them because they were trying to steal from him. It's still not okay, you asshole. Later on, Shawcross would tell authorities that he had broken a piece of his car during the struggle with Elizabeth and that he would dump her body in or around Wayne County because he was afraid that the police were going to catch him. This time, there would be a witness who had seen this quote-unquote Mitch the day before, and with none other than Elizabeth Gibson. The witness was a woman named Joanne Van Nostrand, who I saw frequently spoke about in the book that was about this case. She would describe in detail her own interaction with who she believed to be the killer, Shawcross, and where she had been picked up by him and that she had been getting scared, so she pulled out her knife. And as they continued to engage in sexual activity, Shawcross asked her to act like a dead person in order for him to finish, because Joanne would say that it took forever for Shawcross to finish. Joanne would later be interviewed by the authorities. I tried to find more information on this next victim, really hard, but I could not find anything more on her, which just is heartbreaking. Darlene Trippi was a 32-year-old sex worker that Shawcross picked up on December 15th from an area on Lake Avenue, and this is when the pair would find an empty parking lot. Shawcross paid Darlene money, and the two engaged in oral sex, but Shawcross wasn't able to achieve an erection. Darlene was said to have gotten frustrated with Shawcross and called him some names, which enraged Shawcross to the point where he strangled her to death while he was still laying on top of her. He then dumped her body in some nearby woods. December 17th, Shawcross would pick up 34-year-old June Cicero, where he would then take her to a remote area and tried to have sex before ultimately strangling her. June was said to be a well-known sex worker who was good at staying alert and knew about the killer in the area. One source would say that not long before June had disappeared, she had been quote-unquote bragging to the local police that she was not afraid of the killer, but in fact, she thought that the man should be afraid of her instead, and the authorities had thought the same. So that kind of tells you the badass woman that she was. It was said on the documentary that she was kind of allowed to look for sex work anywhere she wanted. So if there was women on a certain corner, if she showed up, they would leave because she was kind of the queen bee about it. After Shawcross had strangled June to death, he took her body and dumped it on the Salmon River over the side of a bridge. He would later admit to the authorities that he went back to the body 2 days later and June was still frozen. Remember, this is the end of the year. He then used a small saw to cut off the vagina, or away, from June's remains and then admitted he ate it. So gross, and what a fucking pig. Wait until you see some pictures this week on the TheKillFile socials. He looks like a disgusting pigman. On New Year's Eve of 1989, a trooper would be given some evidence. The top investigator of the New York police was called by the trooper, stating that he had gotten some boots by a motorist that had been driving by. They explained they found him near Northampton Park. The trooper was then headed there and while searching found a pair of jeans in a field. Inside of the jeans, there was a woman's birth certificate. The name on the birth certificate was Felicia Stevens. Felicia was only 20 years old, and this is when the authorities would go to her mother's house asking when the last time they saw her was, etc. All of the agencies that were working the case came together and formed a large search party, including horses, dogs, and boots on the ground, walking together trying to locate Felicia. The New York State Police would then bring out a helicopter for 3 days looking for her body. John, who was head of the New York investigation, suggested they fly the route from where Felicia's clothing was found to where she normally worked, and this was a stretch of about 14-ish miles. Only a few minutes into the route, the authorities would see frozen in the ice, under a bridge, a body. As they are finding the body, they realize that they can also see a man with a gray van that was known to be suspicious among the sex workers as the vehicle that Mitch drove. They also just happen to see that the man is outside of the passenger side of the van and he's urinating off the bridge. When this man saw the helicopter, he jumped in the driver's seat and left, heading east. So not only does this fucker like to kill women in horrific and awful ways, but then of course, because they have to come back to the scene of the crime to relive their shit or remind themselves that it's real or feel the feeling again, but then this fuckhead pees over the bridge onto where he knows his victim's body is. What an absolute douchebag. That has to be some sort of sadistic control or wanting to humiliate his victim thing, right? Who fucking does that? And I love that he just happens to be peeing when the police helicopter flies over. So, of course, because of the FBI profile, they knew that their suspect would most likely come revisit the scene of their crimes. The authorities that have followed the gray van to a parking lot that happened to be the lot of a nursing home. The helicopter was waiting for ground forces to get to the area. They then see a man go inside of the nursing home. When authorities arrived, they learned the identity of the man was Arthur Shawcross. When the officer asked for his ID, he told them he didn't have a license because he was on parole, which was huge for them. This is when they took Shawcross to the station and figured out that he was the man who had killed 2 children a while back. They had hopes that this was indeed the Genesee River Killer. While authorities were interviewing Shawcross, other teams were busy identifying the body that they had just discovered under the bridge. This body would turn out to not be that of Felicia Stevens, but instead was the body of June Cicero. When the police would ask Shawcross during the interview about the body, he would deny knowing anything about the murder and simply said he had to pee. The authorities just let Shawcross talk and talk as he wanted to, and they actually took him to lunch and let him keep talking. Then they bought him dinner and continued letting him give them some really good information. While this was going on, investigators were able to search Shawcross's home, where they would find the same type of cleaning wipes found at the scene of June Stott's murder and Dorothy Keeler's murder. When the authorities called the manufacturer of the wipes, they would say that there's only one place that's using them, or at least had ordered them, out in Rochester, and this was in fact the G&G Cheese place where Shawcross worked. This is also when Joanne would give the police a positive identification of who she saw driving Elizabeth Gibson. While the police were searching Shawcross's vehicle for evidence, they would come across a few items. First, they would find an earring that was figured out to be June Cicero's, and they knew this because the other earring was still on the remains of June. Sloppy. They were also able to match some fibers found in the back of the car as well. It was stated that there was a lot of physical evidence that would end up linking Arthur Shawcross to the killings of these women. On January 4th, 1990, Arthur Shawcross would be arrested at the age of 44. A quote given by Robert Kill, who was the father of Karen Hill, that second child that Shawcross killed, was found in an article on UPI, says, quote, "I'd like him to be put away in the frying pan, double voltage, double amperage. And the parole board that let him out should be made to finish the sentence that he was supposed to have had the first time." End quote. I agree with Mr. Hill. Just saying. Dr. Elizabeth Yardley would say that she was struck by just how calm Shawcross was during the arrest and interrogation. When pressed about the possibility of his mistress Clara's involvement, this is when Shawcross would adamantly say that she had nothing to do with this, and that this was all him. Further interviewing would lead Shawcross looking at pictures and telling authorities he killed this one and that one and who they were. He would admit to 10 murders. The authorities would say when he was confessing, he always seemed to make it the victim's fault that they got killed, which was probably like the wallet thing that he had said on some of the women. After this, Shawcross would take authorities to where some of the bodies were that they hadn't found yet. The only murder that Shawcross would not admit to was his last victim, a woman named Felicia Stevens. The authorities believed this was because Felicia was black, and they thought that he didn't want to admit that he had had sex with a black woman, which confused me because Kimberly Logan was black, and many sources had her as a victim, one being the Big Book of Serial Killers, but this is when I realized that her name was missing from the list on Murderpedia, but she was in other sources as well. So I had wondered if maybe he didn't initially cop to having sex and killing the two women who happened to be black. And if that's the case, it makes me want to pluck this fucker's eyeballs out. Ugh, it's so fucking gross. So you'll admit to being a murderer, although it's always their fault, but you won't admit to sleeping with black women? It makes me actually mad. And how fucking dare he do that to these women's families who deserve answers. Fuck you, Audie. He was still thankfully charged with her murder because she was strangled just like the rest of the women. He was, though, never charged with Kimberly Logan's murder, but because she was found in a similar state as Karen Hill, the 8-year-old little girl, she was added to the list of his victims. The defense for Shawcross's trial was trying to claim insanity, of course, but the authorities already knew that he was a seemingly pathological liar and would only tell half-truths to better things for himself. So I actually watched another documentary-style film called Crazy, Not Insane, where a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Dorothy Lewis, who has worked with upward of 22 serial killers, and that's beside like the regular killers, as she said in kind of an unbelieving way. You guys, I just love this woman. I'm not sure if I agree with her diagnosis of Arthur Shawcross as a possible dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, because I think Shawcross was full of shit and made stuff up and tried to get sympathy from Dr. Lewis and tried to take the blame off himself. However, I am halfway through the film, and it is so incredibly fascinating, and it shows a bunch of film of Arthur Shawcross and another killer in their quote-unquote other states, and also shows that he has some scar tissue in his head, and we all know that head injuries have actually been linked to violence and whatnot. Dr. Lewis testifies on behalf of the defense, believing that Shawcross should be institutionalized and not put in prison. Dr. Lewis believes that people who do heinous things like this are made and not born, and that most of these people are products of abuse and trauma. While I personally tend to agree, I don't think I could say it as a blanket statement, only because there are sometimes things that are hard to explain in cases where kids have not been abused and still become serial killers or murderers or are violent, or even killers when they are children themselves. I plan on finishing the docufilm, and I'm looking forward to it because I find that stuff so fascinating. So if you're like me, you might enjoy that film. So the man I spoke of before, John from the New York Police Department, would say that the insanity plea was easy to disprove because he was able to tell the authorities and even show them where the bodies were of the women that he had murdered. And he also said that you can't do that if you're insane. The prosecution did a good job with this case. After 2 or 3 weeks of testimony, the jury would find Arthur Shawcross guilty for the murders of 10 women and was sentenced to 25 years for each of these women. And on top of that, he would get another life sentence for the murder of Elizabeth Gibson, who had been found in a different county, which needed a whole separate trial. Civilian Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York, is where Arthur Shawcross would be until he died in 2008 at the age of 63 from cardiac arrest. The truth of the matter, as Dr. Elizabeth Yardley said, and we're all thinking, is that all of these women would have kept their lives had Arthur Shawcross been properly prosecuted for the killing of the 2 children back in the 70s. And that's a damn shame for all of the victims and their loved ones. And that, my friends, is the story of Arthur Shawcross, the sadist, the rapist, the murderer, the Genesee River Killer. Fuck. What an absolutely horrific story of a human being, right? Oh shit, this guy was awful. I truly agree with some of the experts who think that this sick fuck would have kept on killing children had he not gotten so much heat for it. I agree that is the reason that he turned his murderous gaze to sex workers, thinking that no one would care. But people do care. Everyone should care. People are people, right? There is just a plethora of information about this case all over the place. If you're interested or if you know something that I didn't cover, please feel free to share it anywhere on the TheKillFile socials. I like it when people tell me follow-ups to the cases I've covered. I can't find everything, obviously, but I do my best. The part that sticks out to me the most, besides like the children, because of course that's the worst, but it was the fact that he would go back later to so many victims and essentially cut out their vaginas and eat them. Ew! What? I saw a little smidgen of this in some crime scene photos. It's easy to think of these stories as just that, stories. So when you get a chance to see the people or photos, it's just a good reminder that they were someone's child, mother, father, son, daughter, whoever. No one deserves this kind of brutality or this kind of death. Except for Arthur Shawcross. He deserves every bit of it, and it's kind of a bummer that his own heart took him out. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this case as much as I did, and I hope to see you guys next week for another episode here on TheKillFile. Stay safe, you guys. Bye! Alright guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help TheKillFile and other true crime lovers find us. Also, check out the website at TheKillFile.com to suggest a case. Find our merch shop for fun KillFile gear, which you can also find at thekillfile.printify.me and help support the podcast. Have a suggestion or want to share your own true crime stories? Email thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com for a chance to get them read on the podcast. Follow The KillFile on your favorite social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, X, Blue X, TikTok, and of course, you can subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. We are either listed as The KillFile or The KillFile Podcast. Come on back Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case here on The KillFile, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.